Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are going over Chapter 9, Aeril 3. So, Aeril 3 is back in the Eridonia plotline, essentially. Aeril 3 follows the events of Aeril 2 by a couple hours, and to give a brief synopsis of what happens in this chapter, Aeril, with much on his mind, goes down to the kitchen, has a conversation with Amnia, has a conversation with Preston, sees some other things happening around the castle, and then goes on a small hunt slash ride through the woods with himself, Lucian, Edmund, and Egenhand. During this, Aeril hears some strange noises, and then the chapter ends with uh, a accident of sorts. So this chapter has a couple things going on in the background as usual, and I will elaborate some of them. However, this one also is very much paired with Iral 2 in that there are some things which require additional reading to fully kind of get what I'm trying to say at. So, without further ado, let's begin with the epigraph. So, this epigraph comes from the Book of Newman and Moonin, which is a religious text or something of that sort by a woman named Euphemia the Sage. Euphemia actually is Greek for euphaimein, which is like to say well. It's where we get the word euphemism from, and a euphemism is to say something the best way possible, which is to not really talk about it at all. So the actual contents of the epigraph is more lore on Sortira, the granddaughter of Dios, and how Sortira is essentially the angel of death. We have mentioned this previously, but she is the holder of Scythe and Chain and Bull, and she is associated with the dogs and with songbirds. And that when people die, they are embraced by Sortira and brought down beneath the earth. And with that note of death and spirits, we have Iroh at the beginning of the chapter being um, focused on by death and spirits. He again has the thought of the Lord of Blackbirds in his head from the last night. A daughter shall be a bearer of your curse. However, the spirits of the dead are whispering to him from the wood. The idea is that the spirits of the dead are inside the trees, or rather are manifesting from the trees. And then he hears only the rustle of cedar, oak, and cypress, mirroring how these are the trees around him and these are the voices, the cedars, the oaks, and the cypress. Of course, being surrounded in a forest with many different types of wood evokes the events of Iroh 1 and him being beneath the earth, surrounded by many different types of masks. And whereas the trees are implied to hold the spirits of the dead, here there, the masks are also implied to hold the spirits of the dead, or rather, the person the mask is meant to represent. So Iroh here is doubting himself. Who is he? Who is he to become? And this essentially is the main struggle of Iroh's character currently. He is at a crossroads in his life and is trying to decide whether or not he really wants to go back to the Rooks, which the answer is no. But the other question is, what is the alternative? Because we still don't know what Egenhand is up to or what he has planned for Iroh. So Iroh goes down and we see Amnia back at work and she says, I know you're there, I can recognize you. And then we again have the evocation of the beast on Iroh's shoulder. Now, what this beast is, we know it's usually portrayed as some kind of vulture or dark bird or blackbird or something like that, but it seems to be a thing. This beast seems to be something Iroh is conscientious of and something which is a poor influence on him. So the black beast on the shoulder may be ambition or apathy or self-doubt or something of that sort. It is something that is holding Iroh back, but is also something that is integral to him. And then we have the mention of after a brief description of some food, we have the mention and beginning of Brother Preston. Now, Brother Preston is an interesting character in that, well, first off, he's a bit of a reference to something, but besides for that, Brother Preston has been mentioned a couple times previously. In Lucian 2, we heard him first by name without getting him introduced, and then in Fortuna 2, we have Brother Preston, his voice appearing if his own person doesn't. And here we have essentially in lieu of Casimir himself, Brother Preston is one of the chief parental figures in Iroh's life. Brother Preston is described in but as Brother Preston is described as Iril's grandfather, but also this is a chapter where Aeril again brings up his own actual grandfather, Aeril Argent, in addition to, well, Casmire's grandfather. So Aeril Argent is Aeril's maternal grandfather. And Brother Preston is short, plain, and has a severe pollen allergy, more or less, spring sneeze fever. And because of that, Brother Preston has rheumy eyes that are like red and bloodshot, and he sniffles a lot. So he's not terribly physically imposing as a specimen. And he and Amnia have a bit of banter, and Brother Preston again names the yellow heron, which is the god of the rooks. The rooks don't worship the triarchy, they have their own agenda and own um, way of doing things, essentially. But Brother Preston puts it together immediately that it has not been 5 years because he would be paying attention to these things. Therefore, has either decided to no longer seek a career at the Rooks or some extenuating circumstances happened. And Aeril says, yes, there is an extenuating circumstance as I came back to see my mother, who's dead. And then Trismegistus Austanes, the Trismegistus comes from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. The Trismegisti are the heads of the various rookeries. So essentially, Aeril got a letter or permission from the head of the rooks in Fair Calais, minus the High Trismegistus, who's the head of the rooks overall, to go back home. And he said, we again have this discussion of the timing of things, where Iroh's permitted 40 days, which is a lot, but still countably large, to head back, and then he'll be able to finish his initiation. Now, having exactly 40 days to go on some kind of journey might evoke some certain biblical things, but that is a bit beside this at the moment. So Preston also, Iroh tries to deflect by saying Lucian's already up. I'm already up. It's not a big deal. Preston buys none of this. Preston knows it is not a usual thing for people who are just about to finish their initiation to leave and then come back and then finish their initiation anyways. That's not how things are done. And they essentially agree to have the rest of their discussion by themselves. And we have Brother Preston who has a hand on his bronze medallion, which is a similar tick to what Aeril has, where he grasps his the black one, with the white line on it that looks like an eye, his eye medallion. Aeril does that similarly as a nervous tick. He might have picked it up from Preston. And then now we have them walking through quite a part of the castle, and they begin again. And Aeril immediately starts talking about the chasm of the crypt, and have the rain in recent descents, if not in living memory. And Brother Preston says in the past 5 years since you left, no, past century, living memory, essentially. I'm a better healer than a historian. Do you have any dreams about them last night? And then here we get the reveal that Aeril has been having dreams about the chasm of the crypt for years. He's been having dreams about it for a year, and the dreams are usually him presumably falling down the central hall or collapsing floors. So presumably when he had the episode with Aeril several years earlier, where he gets a broken arm, presumably there was a collapsing floor and he fell through something. Now, he says he's walking around, and then we also have it confirmed that Aeril in the dream was someone else. He wasn't himself in the dream, and there are some implications about who exactly he was in the dream. We'll get to that. But then Aeril asks, how well can dreams tell the future? Which is an interesting question, basically. So Preston says that most of the time, dreams are just dialogues between us and our innermost selves, which is more or less what dreams are to you and me. That dreams are ways of our minds processing things that we've learned about and seen in the previous days and putting them together. Some dreams are some byproduct of essentially turning things into long-term memory, but we don't really know what the purpose dreams serve are. And then the dreams telling the future, first he says that if dreams are tell the future, they are sent by the gods. However, the gods prefer to send information about the future in air, so that'd be like in clouds, in water, that would be like signs on water or things seen at sea, or the ways river shifts, or types of divination, or in flesh, which is essentially haruspition, where you dissect or vivisect an animal and then look at the organs to see what like the color of the liver is and how the organs are arranged, and you can determine things about the future from that. Haruspition is an old Etruscan practice that then gets adopted by the Romans. However, also, Preston says there are two ways to know the future, and the two ways are seeing all things, which is essentially being able to extrapolate the future from perfect information in the present. For instance, if I have, um, say, a pen, and I drop the pen, I will know as the pen is falling through the air, I will know the pen will hit the ground. That is an extrapolation. I effectively am knowing the future. But now, say a gust of wind and comes along and knocks the pen away, then the pen's going to land somewhere else and I was wrong. The other way to know the future is um, retroactively, where you see the future as something already past. That essentially you have a vision of the future, and then you see the thing happen in real life, and then you see, oh, it's the same thing as I saw in the past. I remember it was going to happen like this, except now, it would take to do the former, to see all things, requires an insane level of intelligence, and to do the latter requires magic. So, sure, why wouldn't the gods be able to tell the future if the gods are, in a sort of Hellenistic, Greco-Roman sense, incredibly powerful spiritual beings who could extrapolate the future or could have magical powers which allow them to know the future as if something remembered. And then Aeril says in the dream, Aeril again looking over his shoulder, being one of his other nervous tics, I was to have a daughter, but I don't, not yet at least. And the person who told me I thought they were the Lord of Blackbirds. I don't know. And then he immediately talks about his grandfather. And here we have the confession that um, uh, so first, Auril Argent dies when Aeril's 5, and then we have Auril the Charcoal-Handed. And the Auril dies when he was 5 makes us think of also the 5 years ago when Aeril left. So there's this connectivity there. Now, Auril is charcoal-handed because one of his hands, presumably his left hand, was burned in a fire when he was a kid, evoking the story of Moses with the ruby and the burning coal. Now, that Aeril is talking about a dream where he wasn't himself and immediately starts asking about his grandfather suggests the fact that the dream was from the perspective of Auril Argent, which now makes a lot more sense. And in fact in Aeril 2, if you remember, he wakes up and looks at his hand, which would have been the hand that would have been burned. And Aeril does not have a daughter, not that we know of, but we know of some person who definitely did have a daughter, which is Sir Auril, because Auril's daughter was Aeril's mother. So that's a lot of information, but by this point, one is able to put that together. There is a bit more to it, but I do not want to say quite yet. But we do get the idea that if not directly dreaming of his father, if that Aeril is dreaming about being his grandfather, if not something more than that, he's having a dream, and in the dream, he's imagining himself as in the life of his grandfather. As for how the curse fits into that, we will see. And then here we have some more information that Auril was the descendant of a Sibyl. A Sibyl is essentially like a woman who lives in the wilderness and communes with nature and with the spirits of the dead. The classic one is the Sibyl of Cumae, who gives the Sibyl of Cumae is the one who gives Aeneas access to the underworld in the Aeneid, where they go down and they see the spirit of Dido and things like that. There's also another Sibyl who has the Sibylline books, which are given to the ancient Roman kings and hold prophecy, which is the future known retroactively. So here we have a connection between seeing the future and seeing the dead. And the beginning of the chapter, we have Aeril hearing the dead, and also we have Aeril thinking of the future. And then, but here we have a wrench thrown into this, which that maybe it wasn't Auril who was the daughter, descendant, or whatever have you of the Sybil. Maybe it was Aurel's wife. So who knows? It might not be important. Either way, the story goes is one of them. So who knows? Might not be important. Might not be important because like if it's Aurel's wife, not Aurel, like what does it matter? Then Aeril says, I thought you knew, Aurel, and Preston says, I did, although myself only stayed calling this castle in the year of your parents' union. So let's do some math real quick. So Aeril is born in, like, say, year 0. Lucian is 3 years older than Aeril, so Lucian is born in year -3. And then we have the marriage of Casimir and Lady Shoshana. Presuming that Shoshana was not yet pregnant when Casimir and she marry, that means that at the minimum they had been married 4 years by the time Iroh is born. At minimum, it could be longer. Now, since Aurel dies when Iroh is 5, that means there is a minimum of 9 years in the time that Brother Preston knew Aurel, yet while Aurel was still alive. There are 9 years minimum for that, and a couple more years maximum, essentially. You can there is an appendix, and one can use it to if I were to provide it, one would be able to compare the ages and figure out when exactly Shoshana and Casimir get married, but they get married in their early 20s. So more or less 9 to say 12 years is probably around the time that Preston and Aurel had time to interact. Now, with that being said, Preston also says, I myself only calling this castle home in the year of your parents' union, which means that realistically Preston was assigned to the Marulai when they got married, which suggests that rooks, if they are trained in the they are trained in the rookeries, they get their medallions, they get initiated into the August Order, and then they live clerical lives or they live scribal lives, and then eventually they get assigned to great clans. And Preston was assigned to the Marulai, which means that he is really there just as a job to teach and to manage communications, and that he could be recalled at any point if the need so arises, or someone be sent to take Preston's place. Preston is really there, and although he has a grandfatherly connection to Iroh, he is still a man of his religious order. So, with that being said, we hear Preston talk about Aurel. He's a knight, a heroic knight, so sort of this idealized person, but there was a deep sadness about him, a yearning for the far place of the earth. So again, with the motif of this being a translated text, far is synonymous with deep, or say a deep cave or the deep sea, with both words being altum in Latin. So he's yearning for the far places of the earth, but also the deep places of the earth, which is inside of caves. And you are his grandson without a doubt, unless the gods play us. The gods playing us would essentially be the idea that Iroh is not Aurel's grandson, which would mean that Aurel's mother is not Shoshana. That would be what the gods playing him would be. However, it seems that Aeril is Aurel's grandson, which means if for some reason Aurel's parentage would be called into question, it would be his father and not his mother. But the gods are not seemingly playing us, so we don't need to worry about that. And then Aeril says there are other curious things about him, and one can infer what Aeril is thinking about this. And we have this other thing that Aurel was close with your father and his own. So Aeryl's father is Casimir. Aurel is the father-in-law of Casimir. So, and Aurel was close with both Casimir and Casimir's father, and that was before my time. So the fact that Aurel was there when Casimir was growing up, and that Aurel with was also friends with Casimir's father, implies that Aurel and Casimir's father, so Aeryl's two grandfathers, were friends earlier in life, and then decided that their respective children should be married to each other. how else would Aeril be close with Casimir's father being his son-in-law, unless they were close when they got married and in the years afterwards. It seems that coming from such humble origins, this confirms that he was eternally grateful to have his line joined to the ancient Maruli. This implies that the plan was for Aeril and Casimir's father to have their children married at some point, probably because Aeril's father and it's probably because Shoshana's father, Aeril, and Casimir's father, the late Lord Marula, were friends earlier in life. This makes Preston think of something. The thing it makes him think of, strangely enough, is whether Aeril has had any recent epileptic episodes. And Aeril says, no, obviously not. Not for the better part of 10 years. I thought you said they're behind me. And Preston is insisting on this. Clearly, he's caught some kind of idea in his mind. He's not letting it go. And Aeril says, I haven't had any nightmares, especially in the past 5 years, which means that the nightmares are probably linked to living in Castle Ravencroft, which is interesting, shall we say. And then he says, and your grandfather, didn't he too share that same illness? We don't know which grandfather Preston is talking about, but presumably because the entire conversation has been about Sir Aurel, he's talking about Sir Aurel. Did Sir Aurel also suffer from epilepsy? And um, Aurel says, no, you said it was one of Aurel's parents, so one of Aurel's great grandparents, which there are. Um, so one of Aurel's mother's father's parents, which there are two of, and he says which one. He says his father, I think. We don't know if Aeril actually is remembering correctly, but it seems that from the line you once said, it seems that when Aeril first developed epilepsy after being lost in the chasm of the crypt, Brother Preston went through the genealogies and through the medical history of the Maruli, which were written down somewhere, and determined that Aeril might have developed epilepsy because one of his ancestors had it. And then Preston communicated that. However, because Preston is giving a treatment to Aeril, and there are one treatments among many he's giving as a healer, is not something he's thinking about as much. Versus Aeril, where he's thinking about something of his ancestors' medical history, it is more directly related to him, and therefore he is a bit better remembering it. Whereas he's able to provide an answer, maybe not the right answer, where Brother Preston simply is not. There's a lot going on. And then we have a small break where we have Lucian fighting Sir Miles, and here we have a motif that we see repeatedly throughout the book, which is that Sir Miles is. So first off, we have Sir Miles, who's old and looks like cut marble and has a handlebar mustache, very stylish. But so Sir Miles is wielding a large greatsword, and Lucian is being fast. So essentially, we have the strength build versus the dexterity build, which is a motif we will see in future chapters, to say lightly. And then we have this metaphor where Sir Miles is moving slow and rotating around, and Lucian is winning, but he's expending a lot of energy. And it is said rather explicitly that this is a metaphor for Lucian's style of governing, that Lucian expends a lot of energy when realistically he might be able to succeed at his goals if he was to expend less energy and focus on winning the fight rather than fighting itself. And Preston says it pretty much like that he would spend, if he spent more time fighting, as he does trying to rule, he might fight better, with this entire fight being a metaphor for his leadership and for his governorship of the mandate. And then there's this line that all great rulers are tested in some way, and Aeril thinks of the coming famine or the coming drought, and that the long, harsh winters where the sun shows face less than not, a lack of sun, the doom-swept seas, whatever that means, and then of the dust in the dry earth, the rivers sluggishly slithering beneath the summer sun, starved of the precious snowmelt. Besides for being a fun alliteration, this is what rivers look like under drought, where they dry up and narrow if they don't completely run dry. And Ira then asks about the drought, and Preston says, tell Siveth. So Brother Simon is the rook who's at Tel Siveth, which is where the Sivethets are from. Ovidius Siveth of Ekin II, notably, and that they're near Sarkaya, and near Sarkaya is to the south. And they've been hit harder than Erdonia, so there's even less rainfall there. And then Ira remembered this is the first mention that he went through near Sarkaya to get to Erdonia. And then we have should famine come, however the white-tailed game will be plentiful indeed, for others who will be soon eating our tables, which is the curse that is levied upon the Trojans in the Aeneid, that you will be eating your tables when you get to Italy because you're so hungry, when in fact it is toppings on flatbread. So this eating our tables is meant to be evocative of famine, but actually isn't evocative, but actually doesn't mean famine when we get to where that actually is mentioned originally. However, it might be the same, but it might be different. We don't know. And then Aeril asks, "What do you think of him?" And Preston immediately knows that they're talking about Egg in Hand. And Preston, we've always said that he's someone who thinks too much about things, that he's prone to conspiracy and isn't always right. And Brother Preston is completely right about the fact that Egg in Hand, what does Master of the Imperial Household mean? Egg in Hand, is it his real name? He doesn't have a lordship. What's up? Something's not right here. And then he says, "Oh, so you know Sarpedon Vix, Sarpedon Stonetooth, one of the usurpers from the Tetrarchy 13 years ago? Well, Eggenhand might be a Vix, might be the last of the Vixes after the entire line was wiped out, which maybe, but this might, Iroh in fact says what we might all be thinking, which is that seems a bit much. Is Preston for real? We don't know. Preston might be right, but Preston might be wrong. And you hear what he asked me, and Preston says, "Yeah, I heard he wasn't there, but presumably someone there told him. Meg told him when the household guard told him. There were a lot of options. Word travels quickly in Castle Ravencroft." And then Iroh brings up the other thing which was mentioned in Fortuna too, that saying it a bit more explicitly this time, that how did they cut? They seemingly came here knowing I'd be here, but how would they know how when I'd been on the road for 20 days and they were on the road for longer? So how did they know? And Lucian and Iroh doesn't quite say it. That the two arrived hours after me, one in fact seeking me as if knowing I'd be here. But how did they know? Because I left after they did. So how did they know I'd be here? And this will be eventually revealed. And then we have Lucian wins. However, Lucian asks, "Do you yield?" instead of just finishing the job. And Miles kicks Lucian out from under him and then pulls actual live steel against Lucian's neck, which is a massive, massive breach of code where they were fighting with blunted swords, and um, Sir Miles could kill Lucian right now if he wanted to. And this shows that Lucian does not quite have the discipline of his lieutenants under him, or that Miles is someone who really cares about winning and might not care if someone gets hurt in the process of doing it. And then we have this line about shouldn't knights always play fair? And the answer is no, knights shouldn't always play fair because the knight's job is to win. I could go into a thing of discussing like chivalric knights and what being a knight actually is and power and things like that, but I feel as if that isn't exactly what the story's about. That my intention with Whispers of the Deep isn't deconstructing fantasy tropes. I have a particular story I want to tell about, well, from this chapter alone, institutional power, a family legacy, um, dark secrets hidden in the past, things of that sort. And this is something that I could talk about too, but it's not it's not why I'm here essentially. And then we have this line, "Only the dead are deceived by that illusion," which is a callback to a line from Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is for Narcissus saying, "That illusion doesn't deceive me," or "My own illusion doesn't deceive me," which is him talking about his own reflection, with the joke being that it did deceive him. So only the dead are deceived by that illusion. So only the dead knights are the ones who played fair, essentially. All knights who live don't play fair because if they did play fair, they would not be knights because they would be dead. And Lucian is not happy by this. He's not smiling with his eyes, so to speak. And then Preston says, "Another few years of training, I'll assure you win the laurels of the next athletic games." So these are like the Olympic games, but the athletic games, they like, like your discus throwing, your javelin, your wrestling, things like that. And Lucian says the horse but the hawk's wings. So essentially the horse praises the hawk for being able to fly, but the hawk is able to fly because it's a hawk. It is intrinsic to its nature. The horse is only complementing the hawk on something which comes naturally to it simply because the horse cannot. Preston praises Lucian for fighting well when Lucian should fight well because he's expected to. So it is truly not something terribly impressive. And Edmund reveals that he likes to go horse archer, where he shoots and rides. And then he says, let's go through the woods and shoot bows and fuck around. And Lucian's like, really? I got stuff I need to do. And Eganhan says, yeah, about that. My job is to make sure you're safe, and this seems like a stupid idea. And yet, he says, and because of that, Aeril, why don't you come with us? Which is what? Just he's essentially saying that my designs do not allow you to ride alone, which presumably is like my design is to keep you safe. I cannot allow you to ride alone with someone in case someone like something happened or there's someone in the woods who want to kill you, or if Lucian want to kill you, I need to make sure you're safe. However, then he says, why doesn't Iroh come too? But that wouldn't solve the problem, except unless we are supposed to take they do not ride that do not allow you to ride alone is literal. That Agenhan's goal is not keeping Edmund safe, but is making sure Iroh's there, which is weird. And then he's like, if you're truly going to leave tomorrow with us, with me, why don't you come on this riding trip just for the day? And Iroh is getting a migraine and says, are you sure? Something about Eganhan's presence is giving Iroh a migraine. And Edmund's like, it would just be resting. But this is realistically him saying, I don't want you to be on this little day escapade with me. I want to spend the time with my old friend. And this sets Iroh off, where we've already discussed that Iroh's thinking about the time it takes to get from Fair Calais to Castle Ravencroft. He says he could have done in 10 7 days and took you double that, which is 30 and 4, which is roughly what Edmund said. He says I could have done it even less. So Iroh's clearly thinking about it's what the fuck is going on because you how again the whole thing of how did you know I would be here to come here to see me? And this is what he's actually thinking about, but he's not saying it. Of course, Egenhand has realized that's what Iroh's thinking about, and Iroh shoots back that, oh, I've been paying attention this whole time because when I got to near Sirkaya, I heard that there were 500 lectorials on the road, which would be Edmund's actual retinue, 500 lectorial guard, and they are at Flotton on the Crossings, which is a city on the border of Erdonia, which is an island in the middle of the Altus River. And Eganhand's like, yeah, you're right. And then he calls it the Woods of Aaron when everyone else is calling Aaron's Wood. Strange. And then Lucian's like, okay, well, the four of us will all go out and it'll be fine. And then he asks for 4 horses to be taken in particular from Eli, which calls back something in Lucian 1, which you might pick up on. And then we have a full circle. We are now back where the chapter began. So all of this previously was a flashback, and now we are in the actual meat of the chapter of like what isn't in the past and what's in the present now. And Iroh asks about Martinez, and Lucian says, I left him in his cell overnight with a dove for company. When I came back, much to my delight, I found him unharmed. So this is a Norian custom where doves or some other vulnerable animal is left in the cell of someone who's being kept overnight in a prison. And then if the animal has been killed by the prisoner in the morning, the prisoner is killed because if they cannot be trusted with the life of a small animal, they are presumed to be basically not right in the head of some way or another. And this clearly isn't what happens because Martinez then instead the animal's fine, and Martinez confesses that yes, he lit the fire, but it's because he thinks the old man was an adulterer and slept with his or the father of his cousins. So let me get the actual quote. Yes, so the father to his cousins. So that would be the old man slept with his like father's sister or something like that. So Lucian says normally that would take a hand, but here he's free to go. But return the 4th day and lashes proportion to his crime. And this essentially is that Lucian is being soft, that we've already had this established fact that, or this implication that Lucian although he makes people happy, he is not good at meting out punishment. In fact, we will learn in future chapters that there's a reason why he is not terribly a fan of certain types of corporal punishment, such as taking hands or limbs. But Lucian says, yeah, no, if he doesn't come back, we will declare him outlaw. So like Lucian clearly doesn't like Martinez, but doesn't believe he deserves to have a hand taken from him. Instead, it deserves to have one lash, which is a sort of dramatic irony for us, or for Lucian at least, because the man Martinez is expecting many lashes, but he's only going to get one. So the thing that's actually going to stay is one lash and the fear of the lashings. Except clearly, this is not something that Lucian has done much in the past, because if he had pulled this trick multiple times in the past, people would expect it. They would know, oh, Lord Lucian will only give one lash for this offense, so it won't be that bad. Which means that Lucian either A, this is one of the first times he's pulled out this trick, or B, Lucian doesn't lash people in general, or rather, and if Lucian doesn't lash and if Lucian lashes people because he doesn't like taking hands, this means that Lucian doesn't do corporal punishment against wrongdoers usually at all. That if the lashing is a replacement for taking hands, and he's doing this thing where he's secretly only going to give them one lash, then this is something which this means that Lucian has not been giving um like very firm punishments in terms of lashings or taking hands or anything of that sort. That is not how he mets justice. That is not how he punishes wrongdoers. And there's a reason for that, which we will get to in future chapters. In fact, the next chapter, which will be Fortuna 3, if I remember correctly. So then we have a massive swarm of pigeons descend, and then Edmund shoots one down and then breaks its neck. It should be noted that pigeons and doves are basically the same bird. So here we have this thing about the importance of not killing a dove, and then we have Edmund immediately killing a dove, meaning that Edmund is someone who is callous about the life of lesser things, or at least the dignity of them, which is something we learned also in Lucian 2 about how he treated Amnia, that Edmund is someone who is smug about his current social position and has lost touch with some of the morals that he grew up with alongside Lucian and Kanta and Aeril and Fortuna. And then he makes a contest out of it immediately, and Agenhan says, sure. By the way, I forgot to mention this, but up above, Iroh looks over his shoulder and sees Egenhand, which is fun. That finally he looks over his shoulder and sees something. And Edmund is someone born in the saddle. Iroh's trying. Lucian is not trying as much. And then Iroh peels off. And we have this weird thing where Iroh hears someone singing, and he thinks the person singing is his mother, but then he starts thinking the person is a Fortuna. And then as he goes towards the voice becomes quieter and quieter, which, the thing, it's like if you're traveling in the woods and you hear someone call your name, no, you didn't. Iroh failed at that, just straight up. That someone calls Iroh's voice, and he immediately recognizes them and immediately tries riding towards them. And like it makes sense, it's the voice of his mother who he thinks is dead, and it's strange, but also in folklore terms, something in the woods which uses the voice of someone you know to call your name is something that wants to kill you. And then the idea that as he rides closer towards the voice gets farther and farther away is also very much in this like cryptid mythology of if there's something in the woods calling your name, if it sounds far, it's close, and if it sounds close, it's far. But then we also have Iroh passing between a pair of ebon-glowing trees near the end of the chapter. Now, ebon-glowing trees, as shown in Ekin 1, and so ebon-glowing trees are first mentioned in Iroh 1, where Nicander the Many Paths sleeps beneath one and spends 8 years getting back home. And we have the idea that ebon-glowing trees have a purplish bark and golden fruit. So if that is the color of whatever happened in the prologue, Aeril is paired with that of passing between or beneath this again. And then the birds return after the woods is incredibly silent. And then there's something flying silently among the pigeons. Now, there are only certain types of things which fly silently, but one of them is owls. And then Aeril tries to make it out, but he doesn't notice the shaft. As to what the shaft is, we will get to that next time in Fortuna 3. I will see you all there. Bye.